Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dissidents and Dictators. This is the Human Rights Foundation conversation series where we expose dictators, debate pressing global human rights issues, and brainstorm how we can collectively put human rights at the top of the world's agenda. My name is Alvaro Piaggio, and I'm the Senior Policy Officer for Latin America with HRF. HRF is an international, non-partisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting and protecting human rights globally, with a focus on countries under authoritarian rule. We unite people in the common cause of promoting liberal democracy. You can visit our website, hrf.org, to learn more about the work that we do. Please also make sure you follow us on Twitter for more conversations like the one we'll be having today. And I would like to let everyone know that this conversation is being recorded and will be released as a podcast in the near future. Well, today we'll be talking about El Salvador's authoritarian slide. After nearly 2 decades of democratic governments, after a brutal civil war, the country's democratic institutions are once again under siege. In 2018, Nayib Bukele, the former mayor of the country's capital, managed to win the presidency without the support of Arena or the FMLN, El Salvador's major political parties. His populist rhetoric and his added use of data and social media have made him a very popular figure, but he has used his popularity to consolidate power in an alarming way. Over the course of this first term, the last 3 years, he has abused emergency powers, assaulted the independence of the judiciary, and even paved the way for his re-election in direct violation of his country's constitution. To talk more about this, we have Nelson Rauda with us today. Nelson is a Salvadorian investigative journalist from El Faro, is Latin America's first online-only newspaper. Nelson has been covering politics, corruption, violence, migration, and human rights for quite a few years now in his home country of El Salvador, and I couldn't think of anyone better to join us and talk about this terrible issue about the situation that is going on in El Salvador. So welcome, Nelson. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Hola, Alvaro. Hello, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to HRF. I tremendously respect the work that you do all over the world, and happy to join this conversation. Certainly, I'll be happy to entertain questions and try to give people an accurate picture of what's going on here in our country.
Thank you. Nelson, we can hear you clearly, but you're a little low, so I'm going to ask you to please speak up as much as you can. All right, thank you. Perfect. Yeah, that's better. Perfect. Good. Yeah. Before I start asking you questions, I just want to let everybody know that if you have any questions or you have any comments, you can wait until the end. We're going to set the last 10 minutes of this hour. So you can ask Nelson any questions that you might have about the situation in El Salvador. There's a lot to cover, so we're going to try to cover as much as we can in these 45, 50 minutes. Nelson, let me start by I just start by telling us a little bit about Bukele's rise to power in El Salvador. As I said before, he's very popular. He won the general election in 2018. But he didn't have the support of the two traditional parties from the right or the left. Tell us a bit, how did this happen? What are the main issues that Salvadorians are so worried about? Very real and pressing issues, and how Bukele sort of took advantage of the situation to bring himself to the presidency.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, what the situation in El Salvador is, and I think Nayib Bukele's major political success has been to capitalize on the discontent that existed and exists with the president of both Arena and FMLN parties. They both parties that made huge dealing with corruption, dealing with the gangs, and overall took the Salvadoran population to a state of desperation and losing hope in the country. So the first thing and I think the key of his success is to capitalize on that discontent, on selling and portraying himself as to be the solution, the future to this country's problems, the future to anything that El Salvador would lead to. And so he's depicted as an outsider. He ran and he did all of his political career with the FMLA, and that's how he started in politics. But then he had a very public breakout with them, and then he did the campaign as if he was an outsider, even though he had been in the political party system for years. And so have many, many, many of his closest collaborators. So I think depicting him as an outsider loses perspective of that fact that he was a part of that system for many years.
That's very interesting. And I know he ran in 2018 on a party that is he was part, like you said, he was part of FMLN, the left wing party in the country. He broke with them and he ran with Ghana, which was another conservative party, wasn't it?
It's a right wing party. It's made with a division or a breakout of the Arena political party. So not really center, I would say, but more right wing.
Yeah. So Bukele, he seems to be very adept at navigating the political arena, and although he framed himself as an outsider, he knew how to navigate that very well. Like you said, like he was part of the system in a way, right?
Yeah, and also not he what the rhetoric is and what his speech is that it's that he's post left wing or right wing. So you don't really have an indication, or you really didn't have an indication of how the ruling would be. And he started out saying things that a lot of people in the United States like to hear. Like he distinctively gave this speech at the Heritage Foundation, this super conservative think tank, talking about the freedom of expression, democracy, rule of law, low intervention of the state in the economy. Just very not left wing things, but very libertarian kind of way. So, and that's basically how he has ruled. I mean, I don't think anybody could see his ruling and say he's a left wing or he ever was in a left wing party.
That's very interesting. So let's just go on a little bit now about when he first came to power. I mean, he was talking about these things that, I mean, they could be libertarian, but arguably they're not. Packed things. Respecting democracy, liberty, freedom of expression, etc. But there was another side to his rhetoric, wasn't it? From the beginning, and especially going into 2020. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and a little bit about I think probably the first thing that caught international news attention when we saw the army go into Congress to, in a way, quote unquote, motivate lawmakers into passing a law that he was pushing.
Yeah, I don't know how much motivation is having guns in front of your face is, but the reality of the February 9th and what we started to see is an authoritarian tendency. And actually, if you paid attention to his political career, there were always these signs of this. I remember he banished some reporters from attending his press conference while he was mayor of San Salvador. I remember he using the municipal police in a clash with the Ministry of Culture while he was mayor of San Salvador. So maybe the overall signs were there, but certainly those pictures got out of hand for the Bukele administration. He was using the army to pressure the Legislative Assembly into passing a security loan, which was allegedly key for his administration, for his political strategy. But then that became a sign of things to come. It became a sign of the large use of the military in the power, in the way that he imagined the assembly should work, like following his orders, like they do now. And I think that's important to say. He won the election by a landslide, and he won the secondary election by an even wider margin. So that's why I think that's what many of the people say when we criticize the democratic tendencies of El Salvador or the authoritarian tendencies. They say, why can you say that, or how can you say that if he's won the elections? The reality is that, yeah, he won the executive branch and he can control it, and he won the legislative branch. And I mean, the Constitution says it should work with the president, but it shouldn't obey its orders. But you can have that. But what they didn't want democratically, and what they did illegally, was the control of the judicial branch. This is not. So people can have an image. Every legislative assembly has the right to elect 5 of the 15 Supreme Court justices. The Bukele administration has elected 10. And every administration has a right to elect an attorney general, but they closed the term of the attorney general that was before. I think I'm getting ahead of things, but the February 19th caught the eye of people because of that. Because you don't really Bukele in that day hinted, not very not a sort of subtle way, he hinted that he had the power and he could push the button if he wanted to, like insinuating to dissolve the legislative assembly. And he didn't. And what he said, why he said that he didn't, is because he heard the word of God, and that God spoke to him very clearly and said to be patient. And yeah, I'm not even exaggerating. I'm just describing how things are, and you can take away what you want of that. But if you need the president to hear the voice of someone in the sky to tell him to respect the democracy, I think there's several questions that can be raised about that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's even in other democracies where you have dangerous people, I think we should always listen to what they say. We should take them at their word, especially when they are talking about having delusions of power, like what you're saying, Bukele had, and then you say we're getting ahead of yourself, and this is exactly my next question. So we had in 2020 this aggressive, symbolic, well, more than symbolic move of bringing the army to pressure the legislature, and in 2021 you actually have specific steps that were very dangerous and not that basically eliminate checks and balances for the executive and basically make the judiciary just an extension of Bukele's whims, his party, and his whims. So tell us how this started in 2021. I believe the first one was, like you mentioned, the cutting short the term of the attorney general. Tell us what happened then, and the series of events that came after that related to Bukele's clear assault on the independence of the judiciary.
Yeah. So in the first years, the first maybe 18 months of his term, he did what most presidents do, which is focusing on the midterm elections and the 2021 elections. And he was saying that the assembly was an obstacle for him to rule. And during the whole 2020, we all went through the COVID-19 pandemic, and the Constitutional Court gave several rulings that limited his power or asked that the assembly did things differently, the assembly that wasn't controlled for him. So it was working in someone you could call independent kind of way, at least not directly controlled by someone. This was supposed to be what happens in a democracy, checks and balances. And El Salvador had a perfect democracy, of course not, and it hadn't been like that. And I know a lot of people say El Salvador has never had a democracy, but what I would say is, yes, that may be true. I think there was a period where there was so many tensions between the democratic institutions, the three branches of the state, that I think that was positive for the country. But the solution to that, the solution cannot be or couldn't be to just go away with every check counterbalance that there is. The solution to that and to years and centuries even of constitutional tradition could not be give every power in the state to a single person, because you may call that as whatever you want, you may not call it a democracy. That's not what it is. But he won the election, his party won, and the president of the Legislative Assembly, Bukele himself, had said or implicated in several occasions that they won because of him. that even people didn't know, and I don't think that some of them still don't know a lot of the elected representatives. But they won because they were Bukele's officials. And then that gave him a lot of control, and it would allow him. This is a majority that has never happened in the history of the country, not since at least 1984, when the ruling party also controlled the majority in the assembly. So it was uncharted territory for the Salvadorans. And what they did was that the first day that they entered the legislature, they did away with the constitutional court. They didn't wait, and they, I don't know, maybe for people in the United States, what, and I've said this before, but maybe people are not content or are not happy with the Supreme Court and would want to do away with them. And there are instilled processes for that. There are institutional procedures and things that you have to check boxes and laws that you have to fulfill. So in El Salvador, they did away with the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court of the Supreme Court, in one night, and they replaced them in one night without following the proper procedures that the Constitution says they have to follow with that. And then they had the police, and the police took control of the building of the Supreme Court in the night, in the middle of the night, and then gave it to the new elected officials. And then the constitutional elected officials, the justices, said in several occasions that they were pressured to resign. So they resigned, and that's how they control the court. And that same thing happened with the Attorney General. And there's a picture of the head of the policeman, of the police corps, with the new Attorney General. And this is not how independent institutions work. And I don't know if you could consider this a democracy. Again, you could rebate me. You could say that they had the right to do it. I don't think they did. But you cannot take these situations and see them and see, oh, this is a democratic way of doing things, because it is not. And that allowed him to control essentially every institution, every major institution in the country. What happened after that? The Salvadoran Constitution, since 1983, it's the one that's current now, but in 200 years of constitutional tradition, El Salvador has never had re-election. The last person who re-elected in this country is Maximiliano Hernandez Martinez, who was a dictator responsible for the indigenous genocide of 1932. Nobody has re-elected since. And even though the Constitution prohibits re-election and even forbids that some citizens promote re-election, punishing them by taking away their civil rights and the politician rights, the new appointed Constitutional Court, the Bukele appointed Constitutional Court, said that the president can run for re-election. So you can do what you want, you can say what you want, but this is not legal. The constitutional chamber cannot interpret that the Constitution says what it doesn't say. And same thing that has happened with the Attorney General's investigation. The Attorney General's investigation have found indications of corruption during the pandemic, during the contracts of the pandemic. They even went on to say that two-thirds of the pandemic shopping was allegedly done with some sort of illegality. They were investigating the Bukele government truce with the gangs, and that's how we investigative journalists found out that there's a fact. We publish audios, we publish videos, we have not videos this time, but pictures. We publish the investigations. We've given all the evidence that the investigators have, and that's the Attorney General that they took off, that they removed. So it's really hard to see the context and not see someone who is clearly manipulating the institutions on his behalf.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have Bukele winning elections, doing away with the Supreme Court, basically, changing the rules for him to be reelected. There's other things. I mean, I know there's not enough time because, like you said, like there was cases of corruption. Obviously, when you have a judiciary that is subservient to the president, then nothing's going to get investigated. There's not even going to be a semblance of justice there. There was also the case of a particularly ridiculous ruling that a decree forcing judges to retire, right? Judges that were.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, judges that were over 60 were made to retire, and that ruling essentially took away a third of the judges in the whole country, and that allowed for a grand restructuration or reassembling of the whole judicial system in the country, and also allow for several judges that weren't over 60s that were allowed to remain in their positions were also moved around in the country, moved away from the capital, sent to to courthouses in the interior. And traditionally, and I say this because I've been covering this for almost 10 years, the judiciary area in the country, the positions in the capital are reserved for people, that are, they're the most cherished positions, and the positions that take or deal with the most important rulings in the country, the most important cases, the most politically charged cases, or the cases that attract the attention of the public opinion. So that allowed them for them to take control not only of the Supreme Court, but in the interior. And we have seen several judges who have been openly critical of the government's policies, or who have made rulings that have defied some orders of someone in the government, that also have been removed from their positions and sent away to other lesser positions in the judicial branch. So yeah, this is uh, this is just in the path of strengthening the stronghold that the Bukele brothers who rule with him, and the President Bukele has over, I would say, every institution in this country.
It's interesting you mentioned the brothers, because it's not just Bukele himself, right? He's involved. His family, his close family, is closely involved in in running the country, right?
Yeah, I think users of Twitter would know this, because they were clearly a presence online when the Bitcoin law was announced. And the reason a lot of people know El Salvador now is that there's the Bitcoin law, this cryptocurrency that's used or allowed to use as legal tender in this country. Uh, it was in that moment that we could see clearly the Bukele brothers like posing in pictures with Jack Mallard from Strike, and appearing in Twitter spaces with people like Nick Todd and other crypto influencers. And we could see clearly one of the ways that they exert their power, even if they are not elected officials, they are not also appointed officials, and the ethics law prohibits the president to name his family in the government. Though he has another brother who is not from his inner circle, but another brother who runs the Institute of Sports in El Salvador.
Yeah. Before I actually want to talk about the Bitcoin situation, because I think it's important, like you said, because it's been the gateway for a lot of people to pay attention to what's going on in El Salvador, and it's a very important part of it. And you can tell us a little bit about what was the motivation behind this, because I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if Bukele was a Bitcoin fan before that, if he was somebody who believed in alternative to central banking. I have no idea, but it didn't strike me as that when I was listening to Bukele early in his presidency. But the other thing I wanted to point out here is like the things we've talked about, the steps that Bukele has taken. And this is just because I know Bukele's image seems very right wing, and he gets a lot of praise from right leaning politicians and people in Latin America, but I think it's important to stress on these things that he has done in such a short period of time that are so similar to the same steps that other authoritarians from both left and right have done, both in Latin America and other places, to eliminate checks and balances, tear down democratic institutions in order to remain in power. One of them is, re-election. I think everyone in Venezuela, even Bolivia, Nicaragua, they know how you change the laws, change the rules of the game, so you can be reelected indefinitely. So going back to the image of Bitcoin and this image abroad, tell us a little bit about how that came about, and what do you think the motivations behind this was? I know HRF has done a lot of work. We do a lot of work with Bitcoin in the sense that we can see it as a force for good in banking people who live under authoritarian regimes, because you can go around the restrictions from authoritarian governments. But what happened in El Salvador? I mean, like, you have a government that is clearly authoritarian, and they're embracing Bitcoin. So tell us a little bit about this and And what has been the impact on how people see El Salvador today?
Yeah, I think it's important to say all of these things in the context of Bitcoin because the Bitcoin law didn't happen in a void, right? It didn't happen. This wasn't a blank page to start with and to do with this experiment. And it happened in a context of a non-democratic or of a declining democracy. And it's important to know also the context. One day before the Bitcoin law was announced, it was announced by President Bukele and Mr. Jack Mallers in a Miami crypto conference. Um, what the government announced is that they were doing away with a cooperation, a collaborative agreement with the Organization of American States to deal with corruption. It was called in here the CCS, and it was modeled after the Guatemalan CCA, which sparked a spring of democratic movements in Guatemala. So a day after he announced that was a part of his campaign. It was a part of his government plan. He announces the Bitcoin law, and and this was only a month after he had done the movement with the Supreme Court and the movement with the Attorney General. So essentially changing the whole international narrative in El Salvador to this building of a crypto utopia. So this is important, and this is my one of my talking points with Bitcoiners, who I come in touch in last year, is if Bitcoin is the separation of the money and state, why are you embracing an authoritarian government who uses and promotes the coin? I feel it's at least paradoxical, and that's how it came to be. That's how it happened. Bitcoin was clearly not a part of the government's plan. I think there's some indication that Bukele had a prior interest in it. There's an old tweet, I think, from like 2015 or 2017, where he mentions Bitcoin. But it was not a part of the governance plan, and it came about after we uncovered some secret conversations, private conversations with businessmen from abroad, mainly Americans, that were talking about the original plans implied a national cryptocurrency. We would need the time to talk about El Salvador's financial situation, which is delicate to say the least, and which puts the country, not because Salvadorans say it, not because journalists say it, but because market analysts say that it's one of the countries that's more likely to fall into a default in the next 18 months. And there's a complicated calendar of bond paying and external debt paying. So Bitcoin falls into that category. And the objectives of Bukele, what he said that this law would do was to bring foreign investment, to bring jobs to El Salvador, kind of in a trickle-down economics kind of way, and also allowing the remittances. Remittances are such an important part of the Salvadoran economy because we have like 3 million people living in the United States, and they send back every year like 20 or 25% of the GDP. So he said that it will allow remittances to be sent with lower fees or with no fees at all. And any way you want to measure it, a year on, it was approved on June and it came into effect in September. Any way you want to measure that or all of those parameters, it just hasn't happened, or it hasn't happened in a way that justifies, for me at least, the investment of close to 200, $300 million in that, in a country that has these conditions, the kind of healthcare system that we have, the kind of public transportation system that we have, the kind of, all these different kind of needs. So this is something of how Bitcoin came to be. And the reality, the other part of the reality is that people have mostly, even though Bukele remains highly popular in the country, like close to 87-90% rates of approval, which is true by any poll, it's also true that Bitcoin hasn't been embraced by the majority of the population. That 71% of Salvadorans say they haven't seen an economic benefit on their own economies because of the law. That only 2 out of 10 people say that they support the Bitcoin approval, and that the majority of the country doesn't use it as a currency. I understand. I respect the perspective of other people. I wouldn't dare to talk about the situation in Lebanon or the situation in elsewhere in the world, Belarus. We were at the Oslo Freedom Forum earlier next year, learning about different realities about how this is used in Africa. I don't know enough about it to criticize it or to make an opinion, But from El Salvador's point of view, I can say it hasn't worked for what they told us he would do.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like you said, how it's been used to. It's very clear that it was a policy used to divert attention, mostly. And I know a lot of people hope that this is that Bitcoin can be a force for good, but like you said, there's a lot of problems when you have a government like the one here, the one that is directing how this is done, and with just political goals in mind, and without regard, like you said, for the financial health and state of the country. So I'm sure we're going to go back to Bitcoin. I'm sure there's probably a question here and there from the audience, but I want to move on a little bit in time and talk about what's been going on this year. We've heard a lot of news now about the state of emergency that the government in El Salvador has enacted, and it's been, I would say, it's been a disaster. You have tens of thousands of arrests. You have violations of due process. Tell us a little bit about why is it that this state of emergency came about, and the abuses that you've seen in the past six months or longer.
Yeah, so you have to address the problem of violence, and El Salvador has had it occupied the position of world champion in homicide violence for several years. And the gangs, which are one of the main reasons this country is known for, the U.S.-made gangs, MS-13 and 18th Street, that were sent back here and became a problem of national security. Basically, since the ending of the Civil War in the early 90s, and grew to be this the most pressing concern on a lot of Salvadorans' minds. And there has been several solutions tried. There has been the policies of mano dura, as they call it in here, the strong hand policies on policing, try to solve it with the military, try to solve it by making the penalties in the criminal law longer, and all of these sort of things kind of have failed. It's rare to see anything that hasn't been tried here. There was a truce between the government and the gangs in 2012 that collapsed and then made the country so much more violent as it had been. And then this came about, and the Bukele, one of the successes for people of the Bukele administration has been his handling of the gangs, of the security situation. What has happened is that basically since Bukele entered the government, you see a plummeting of the homicide rates, which is by all means positive, but it also raises questions: how are you doing? Is it just police plans? And in the reality of it, that it's not. There's also a government agreement with the gangs, and you may say it's fake. You may say whatever you want, but you have all the signs there. You have pictures. You have audios. We published audios recently of a government official saying to other gang members that he had effectively taken out a prisoner of one of the jails and taking him to Guatemala. So it's severely proven by journalistic investigations, by the Department of Treasury, by different accounts. There's an agreement. And that agreement collapsed at the end of March. And in a matter of 3 days in a weekend, we had 87 murders, which if you kind of have to wonder if the security situation is under control. How can gangs retain the power to do with 87 murders in 3 days? It's outrageous. We did a report, a story about the victims, and we showed that a lot of them were non-related to gangs. Innocent Salvadorans were assassinated brutally by these gangs. So that's when the state, the regime of exception, the state of emergency came to be. And that's basically what happened. And we have been in a state of emergency ever since. We have been in the state of emergency since the ending of March, and the Constitution asks the legislative and the elected officials that they have to renew it every 30 days. So they have to they keep prolonging and they keep pushing it to new limits, which is some say it's against the constitution. But yeah, so are other things that are happening in El Salvador right now. And then you have to think that because of the how the brutal have the gangs have been with the population, there's a lot of people who is happy with the policy, who are really content with what's going on, who are really content with the, 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 the dealings. But then you have, if you have 45,000 people in prisons, uh, there's something wrong with how can we be a paradise of freedom and an example to the world when 2% of the adult population of this country is in jail? It's nonsensical, and we have seen that since every institution is controlled by the state, the human rights situation, there's basically nowhere you can go. There's basically no other place that you can attend the people who are denouncing arbitrary arrest cannot don't have anything or anyone who listens to them. I mean, even the demands brought before the Supreme Court, the amount of demands that the Supreme Court took in a year for arbitrary arrest has surpassed and it has doubled in the first 7 months of this year, the yearly average. So it's a very desperate situation. Even if a lot of people like it, it's a very desperate situation if you're dealing with something what you think is an arbitrary arrest yourself.
Absolutely. And from I heard you talk about how a lot of people are on board with this measure from the government. And obviously it's because people are truly and is understandably afraid of violence and they want to see solutions. But like you said, you can't. I mean, it's impossible that in tens of thousands of arrests, they're all. I saw news recently where Bukele refers to them as terrorists. All of them, every single one of them that was arrested. I highly doubt that tens of thousands of people are, violent gangsters causing chaos among the population, and obviously that means that there's a lot. The government is taking a lot of liberties here, and when you have a country where the independence of the judiciary is non-existent anymore, then, and like you said, like the people have no recourse. So you are in a terrible situation, trying to control another terrible situation. So here's my question, my final question, then we can go open it to questions from the audience. So what to do now? What's the outlook in El Salvador? I mean, what's the political opposition doing? Because when 2024 comes, Bukele might still be as popular. He could be reelected, and who knows? It could be the last free election, perhaps, in El Salvador in a long time, as we've seen in other countries in Latin America that have gone through similar transformations. How do you think the opposition has handled it? What can it be done? Because, like you said, people, the Bukele seems to be addressing, obviously in a terrible way, issues that are important to people. So how do you think they can handle it internally? And how do you think the international community has reacted? What do you think the international community needs to do? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the situation it's complicated. I don't pretend to have a crystal ball, but the opposition lacks legitimacy in El Salvador, and that's important because I don't think the right-wing party, Arena, or the FMLN party can have enough legitimacy to be an option for people in the next election. People have not forgotten, and the Bukele administration has made sure that they don't forget how corrupted and how essentially these parties mismanaged this country and allowed it to come into a situation like this. And then the rest of the opposition is scattered. I don't think you can really blame it on them because the situation is what it is, and it's really hard. And there's been certainly political persecution in this country. But this is a really complicated situation. I would say that the election will be in El Salvador. Since the moment that the President Bukele, if he's on the ballot, the election is illegitimate because he doesn't have the right to be in the ballot. This is illegal. And that's the first question I would bring up when time of election comes. And then the other thing, the other situation is that comes 2024. It seems short time, but it's a long time in terms of financial situation. I think the financial situation of the country is the only his Achilles heel, the only vulnerability that he has. And so I make the question why Bitcoin failed to be massively adopted here, because people understood rapidly how volatile it was, and people understood rapidly that they could lose value of their money in a short time. So why people didn't want to embrace this, it comes down to the economics. And I think this is an important thing to consider. The economical situation can turn a political situation very rapidly, can shift it. And this is something that you have to be aware of. And in terms of what the international community has to do, I agree. This is a problem that Salvadorans have to address, and we need to address our own problems. But the international community helps by paying attention to the respect of human rights, to the respect of international agreements that the Salvadoran government has agreed to have.
Thank you, Nelson. Go ahead.
Yeah, as a recipient of cautionary measures from the Inter-American Human Rights Board of Commission, with regard to my job and our lives, and me and other very colleagues at El Faro, these measures have not meant anything for us, that have not meant anything in the practice for us. And I think when the international community presses and do their job and ask questions to the Bukele regime, not just buying the propaganda, not just eating it up, but asking questions and trying to come here and learn from the situation, and going to the streets and actually seeing what things are, not just seeing videos on Twitter or trying to learn from social media and going away. If this country is so sure, I mean, why do people keep, I don't know, turning themselves in at 6:30? Like so I saw people do last night in Apopa, or why do people keep paying for extortion? This is the kind of questions that we need to be asking, and I think when the international community keeps us in mind, in order for us not to become another dictatorship, another full-blown dictatorship, I think they are doing a service to the Salvadoran population.
Thank you. That's very important. I sort of forgot one last thing I wanted to ask, and I think we have a few more minutes. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about how Bukele has responded to criticism from the press, from not necessarily from, well, I wouldn't call it criticism, but like investigations from the judiciary, but independent judges. But how's he reacted to the work that you do, for example? Because I know there's still a vibrant free press in El Salvador, and he's run into a lot of criticism from the newspaper that you work at, but also from others like the Prensa Gráfica and others. What has been the reaction? I know it was Amnesty in a report they published. It was established that the Bukele government used Pegasus, the NSO surveillance tool, on journalists from your newspaper. Is that correct?
Yes, I had the Pegasus analysis by independent organizations, Amnesty certified. Pegasus was in my phone 62 days, and I'm not even in the top 5 of the people in El Faro in terms of how much time they were intervened. And I also think this is something that should be a concern for people invested or interested in technology. And Bitcoin is a freedom use. It is concerning that there's this use of this surveillance software in a country such as this. The situation of the press is critical. I mean, we have journalists who have left the country because of fear of the political retaliation for their job. The situation is especially hard on women who, on top of the harassing, the bullying, the trolling, that we stand on social media. This is going out of social media now. It's becoming like judiciary demands against journalists. It's becoming physical harassment, physical attacks. It's becoming different kinds of stuff, which in the case of women have involved a misogynistic charge to it, a gender bias. And yes, it's a very complicated situation, and I give props. We actually celebrate the Journalist Day on Sunday for here in El Salvador, and I give props to every colleague who is doing their job. And I don't think we want to be heroes. We certainly do not want to be martyrs. But we need to be doing our jobs, and the only way to defend the freedom of the press is by publishing. That's the only way. I believe that people, the press should serve the ruled, not the ruling party or the ruling class. And we're doing an effort into doing that, into telling stories that might not be easy to tell, not be comfortable for the society to hear, but that we need the society keeps hearing the other side. Not become, this self-centered, selfish culture, and to hear about what other people maybe. I don't know. Maybe the exception regime is more comfortable if you're not affected by it. If all you're seeing it is in the news, but not if you live in a community and you have seen that, yeah, there's certainly gang members who have been arrested and criminals, but also innocent people that have taken away and they have to lose at least 6 months of their lives because of an unfair accusation. That shouldn't happen in a democracy, and that shouldn't happen in the country.
That's very important. Let me just say a final few words before I open up to questions. First of all, yeah, again, this is because I'm trying to read some of the comments that we're having here on our Twitter Spaces event, and I think Nelson and everybody else understands that there are some very serious issues that El Salvador needs to deal with, and I think the point that we're trying to make here is that you don't need to resort to authoritarian rules. You don't need to assault the judiciary, especially the judiciary, in order to deal with them. But it is a problem. I mean, because Bukele has offered solutions to this, although they're not the right ones and it's not the right methods. But I mean, it's important to acknowledge that these problems will need to be dealt with. And I think the reason why we have populists who want to assault institutions, not just in El Salvador, but everywhere, it's partly because of a failure to address these problems. So and I think it needs to be a wake-up call for civil society, political organizations everywhere. Yeah, so I wanted to open up to questions, but obviously, as long as you're respectful and you have a real question, I'll be glad to give you some space here. So let me see. All right, I'm really sorry, but I think Nelson is having some internet problems. Like he can't listen to anything right now. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today and listening to this, the situation in El Salvador. And I encourage every one of you to follow Nelson on social media. Follow Alfaro and other El Salvadorian outlets, newspapers, to follow what's going on. And yeah, thank you very much. Also, don't forget to follow HRF and visit our website, hrf.org, to learn more about the work that we do. Thank you so much.